I sat in my car, parked on the curb in front of that damn restaurant. My fingers were clutching the envelope with the last of my money, the crumbs left over after I'd been kicked out of my job. 3 weeks ago, my boss had called me into his office, dryly informed me that the company was moving in a different direction, and an hour later I was standing outside with a box of my belongings. It was my last chance to stay afloat, to not drown in debt and humiliation. But now I was looking through the glass at something far worse than losing my job. Margaret was there, inside. My wife. Her blonde hair glistened under the soft light of the chandeliers, and she was laughing, throwing her head back as if the world around her was full of joy. And sitting next to her was Joshua, my best friend, the man who knew everything about me, from my childhood fears to how I survived my father's death. Their hands rested too close on the table, Margaret's fingers lightly touching his wrist. It wasn't a friendly gesture. It was too intimate. I felt something shiver inside me, as if someone had pulled the wire out of the socket and everything that kept me balanced went out. The job was gone, money almost zero. And now marriage? 10 years together, the vows, the promises, the plans for the future all turned into a farce behind the glass doors of the restaurant. I didn't scream. I didn't jump out of the car to rush in there and make a scene. Instead, I pulled out my phone and turned on my voice recorder. If my world was going to come crashing down, I wasn't going to leave quietly. They didn't know I was here. They didn't know what I was seeing. But they would find out soon enough. Margaret leaned toward Joshua, her lips moving, but I couldn't make out the words. Her smile was the same one I'd seen 1,000 times, carefree easy, as if she'd never known worry. I'd loved that smile once. Joshua said something, and she laughed again, putting her hand on his shoulder. I'd known him for almost 20 years. We'd grown up together, shared beers in the backyard, he'd been best man at my wedding. And now he was sitting there with my wife. Anger, hurt, shock, it all mixed in my chest like a red-hot lump. But I forced myself to stay where I was, turned off my headlights so I wouldn't be seen, and just watched. The recorder was quietly recording the noise of the street, my heavy breaths, the tapping of my fingers on the steering wheel. It was my first step. I didn't know where it would take me, but I felt like it was just the beginning. They thought I was broken, fired, crushed, weak. Let them think. Let them laugh. Soon I'll show them who's weak around here. As Margaret stood up from the table, adjusting her dress, I noticed Joshua giving her a look. It was the look of a predator, sure of his prey. They walked out together, and I ducked down so I wouldn't be seen. She hugged him goodbye, too long, too tight. Then she got into her car and drove away. Joshua stood for a moment longer, lit a cigarette, smiled to himself, and walked to his pickup. I turned off the recorder. My hands were shaking, but I had a plan brewing in my head. If they were going to play me, I'd play it better. And I wouldn't stop until I saw their world burn as brightly as mine did right now. I sat in the car for another 10 minutes after Joshua drove away. The envelope with the money lay on the passenger seat, crumpled as if I was trying to squeeze answers out of it. The silence was pressing, but my mind was buzzing with thoughts. Margaret, Joshua, their laughter, their touches, it all spun before my eyes like a jam tape. I could have gone home, pretended I hadn't seen anything, and waited for the truth to surface like rot on water. But I didn't want to wait. I wanted to know, and I wanted them to pay. Donna, her name came to mind suddenly, like a lifeline. Joshua's wife. We'd never been close. She'd always seemed too proper, too put together, with her perfect hair and strange smile at family dinners. But I'd seen the way she'd look at Joshua when he got drunk and started bragging about his plans to get rich. There was something in her eyes, something irritated or tired. Maybe she was noticing something, too. Maybe she, too, felt her world cracking at the seams. I pulled out my phone, found her number in old messages she'd once texted Margaret about going on a picnic together. My fingers froze over the screen. What would I say? Hey, Donna, I just saw your husband groping my wife. No, I should have been smarter than that. I should have been more careful. I typed it in. Donna, it's Charles. I need to talk to you. It's important. Can we meet tomorrow? Sent it. My heart was pounding like I'd just run a marathon. I didn't know if she'd respond. I didn't know if she'd believe me. But if she was anything like me, she'd long ago sensed something was wrong. The answer came 15 minutes later, when I was on my way home. Charles? Okay, let's meet up. Coffee shop on the corner of Main Street, 10 a.m. I exhaled. The first step had been taken. Now I had to keep my cool and not give away the fact that things were boiling inside of me. The next morning, I arrived early. The coffee shop was nearly empty, smelling of freshly brewed coffee and cinnamon. Donna walked in at 10 sharp, dressed in a strict gray coat, carrying a bag over her shoulder. Her face was calm, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes when she saw me. I nodded, and she sat down across from me. Charles, what's going on? She asked quietly, not even ordering coffee. I took a deep breath. The words stuck in my throat, but I forced them out. I saw Margaret and Joshua at the restaurant yesterday. They're not just friends, Donna. It didn't feel like friendship. She froze. Her fingers clutched the edge of the bag, but her voice remained steady. Are you sure? I saw them touching each other. Heard her laugh. It wasn't innocent. And I don't think it was the first time. Donna lowered her gaze to the table. The silence lasted for an eternity. Then she raised her head, and in her eyes I saw what I felt myself, a mixture of pain and cold determination. I suspected, she said finally. Joshua had become too secretive, always lingering, talking about meetings. And Margaret. She called him more often than she called me. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. But if you saw it, too, we can find out the truth, I interrupted. Together. I'm not just going to sit back and watch them destroy us. She nodded, slowly but surely. Okay, what do you suggest? Watch. Listen. Gather evidence. I've already started taking notes. If they think we're blind and stupid, let them. Until we're ready. Donna smiled slightly, for the first time in the entire conversation. It wasn't joy, but something grim, almost predatory. They don't know who they're messing with, she said. We agreed to keep it a secret. I kept an eye on Margaret. She kept an eye on Joshua. After a couple weeks, we had enough. Scraps of conversation, strange late-night calls, her outings with friends that ended at a motel on the outskirts of town. Everything pointed to one thing. They were planning to leave. Margaret wanted a divorce to take half of what I had left. Joshua was going to squeeze Donna out of their shared business. They thought we were just pawns in their game. But Donna and I decided to play it differently. And we were going to win. The next few days dragged on like a blur. I walked around the house pretending everything was fine, said hello to Margaret when she returned from her get-togethers, and even forced myself to smile when she told her light, carefree stories. Her voice rang as it always did, full of life, but now every sound seemed false to me. She didn't know I could see right through her. She didn't know that every move she made, every word she said, only fueled the fire I was stoking inside of me. Donna called me almost every night. Her voice was cold, businesslike, but I could feel the same rage boiling beneath that mask as it did in me. She and I had become a strange team, two people who had been betrayed but refused to break. She told me she'd noticed money missing from their business together. Joshua wrote it off as an investment, but there was no paperwork. I did, however, record Margaret whispering on the phone, promising someone, obviously him, that it would be resolved soon. They were getting ready, and so were we. The trap idea came to me at night as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Margaret slept beside me. Her breathing was even calm, as if she wasn't ruining my life behind my back. I imagined the two of them sitting somewhere together, laughing at Nami, planning how they would divide the spoils. The thought made me shake, but instead of snapping, I started thinking. What if we gave them a chance to open up? Create a moment where they feel safe to say more than they need to? The next day, I met Donna at the same coffee shop. She looked tired, shadows under her eyes, but there was steel in her gaze. I have an idea, I said, lowering my voice. We could set them up, make them think we're not around, and see what they do. She raised an eyebrow. How? I'll tell Margaret I'm going away for the weekend. Allegedly, an old friend called for a fishing trip. You tell Joshua the same thing, that you're going to your sister's or something. We'll get a motel room across the street from where they usually meet. We'll set up microphones, cameras, whatever we can. If they bite, we'll get more than suspicion." Donna thought for a moment, tapping her fingers on the table. "It's risky," she said finally. "But if it works, we'll crush them." "They think we're blind," I replied. "Let them relax. Let them be wrong." We spent 2 days preparing. I bought a cheap set of hidden cameras and microphones at an electronics store. The salesman didn't even ask why I wanted one. Donna got an old tape recorder and a supply of batteries. Friday night, I packed a bag, threw a couple shirts in it, and loudly told Margaret I was leaving until Sunday. She stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot, and smiled over my shoulder. "Have a good rest, honey," she said, and her voice was so sweet I barely restrained myself from throwing my bag against the wall. "Say hi to Tom." Tom was a fictional friend I made up on the fly. She didn't even blink. When I left, I pretended to leave, but met Donna outside the motel a half hour later. We got a room with windows overlooking the parking lot of the very establishment where I'd first seen them together. Donna called Joshua, lying about going to see her sister, and he took the bait as easily as Margaret did. We set up cameras in several places, one hidden in the bushes near the entrance, another pointed at their favorite table through the glass. The microphone was weak, but if they sat close, we could hear enough. Saturday night they showed up. I saw them through the binoculars, Margaret in the same red dress she wore on our last anniversary, Joshua in his stupid leather jacket. They sat down at a table, ordered wine, and soon her laughter reached us through the microphone. I turned on the tape. Donna sat next to me, gritting her teeth, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. "It'll all be behind us soon," Joshua said, leaning toward her. "Charles will sign the papers next week. He won't even realize what he's lost." "And Donna?" Margaret asked, her voice playful, but with a note of impatience. "She's already on the hook. The business is almost empty. A couple more months, and we're free." I looked at Donna. Her face had gone white, but her eyes were burning. "They think they've won," she whispered. "Not yet," I answered. My voice shook with anger, but inside I felt strangely calm. We had proof. Now we just had to figure out how to use it, and how to make them regret every word they said. We sat in the motel room, staring at the laptop screen where the tape was still scrolling. Their voices, so confident, so smug, echoed in the cramped room. Margaret was laughing, Joshua was bragging, and every word was like a punch in the gut. But I didn't feel crushed anymore. The anger still simmered, but now it was sharp, directed like a blade. We had proof. Not just suspicions, not just scraps of conversation, real, clear words, recorded on video and audio. This was the beginning of their end, and I was going to make that end unforgettable. Donna was silent, her gaze fixed on the screen. She scrolled through the tape over and over until I noticed her fingers trembling slightly. She stopped the video at the moment where Joshua said, "Just a couple more months, and we're free." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Did you hear that?" I asked, even though I knew she'd heard it as clearly as I had. "Yes," she answered, her voice quiet but firm. "But there's more to it than that." Rewind to a minute earlier. I listened. Joshua said something about the business, about how it was almost empty. But then he added, almost carelessly, "Everything's already in place. She won't even know where to look." Margaret giggled in response, as if it were some kind of joke, but I noticed Donna tense up. "What did he mean by that?" I asked. Donna turned to me, her eyes narrowed. "He's hiding the money. Not just taking it out of the business, but hiding it somewhere I won't find it. A secret account, maybe. Or something else. He thinks I'm too stupid to check." I nodded. It made sense. Joshua had always been slippery. He had a knack for getting out of situations, for covering his tracks. If he really was transferring money into some secret account, that explained his confidence. He didn't just want to leave Donna empty-handed, he wanted to walk away with a fortune. And Margaret, judging by her laughter, was in on it with him. "We can find out," I said. "If he had an account, there must be traces. Bank statements, transfers, anything." Donna looked at me, and there was a spark in her gaze, not hope, but something darker, more predatory. "I can access his computer," she said. He thinks I don't know the password. But I saw him enter it a couple months ago. If there's anything on there... And I'll check on Margaret, I interrupted. She left an old laptop in the closet. Said it was broken, but I'm not sure. If she's been texting with it, there could be evidence. We split up like two hunters, following the trail of their prey. Back home, I waited for Margaret to leave. She'd said she was going to the gym, but I didn't believe a word she said. As soon as her car was around the corner, I pulled that old laptop out of the closet. It was dusty and worn, but it turned on after a couple minutes of fiddling with the charger. The password was simple: our wedding date. The irony almost made me laugh out loud. I started digging through her mail, her folders, her deleted files. Nothing at first, just old photos, recipes, work emails. But then I found a hidden folder, password protected once again. After a few failed attempts, I typed in Joshua's name, and it opened. There were screenshots of text messages. "We'll be together soon," he wrote. "Charles won't guess anything," she replied. And then I saw this, a message from Joshua with an account number. "It's all there. As soon as we're done, we'll go anywhere you want to go." I snapped a picture of the screen on my phone, feeling my pulse pounding in my temples. Meanwhile, Donna texted me. Found it. He was transferring money to an offshore account. The dates matched the investments. I have the statements. We met later that day, and she showed me the printouts. The amounts were huge. Hundreds of thousands pulled out of their business in the last 6 months. Joshua wasn't just planning to leave. He wanted to leave rich. "They think we won't find anything," Donna said, her voice shaking with contained rage. "But now we have everything." "Not everything," I replied. "We have proof of their plan. But I want more. I want them to turn themselves in, so they can't get away with it." Donna looked at me, and I knew she was thinking the same thing. "Another trap?" she asked. "Another one," I nodded. "But this time we'll make them panic. And when they run, we'll be waiting." Donna and I sat at the table in her living room, surrounded by printouts, notes, and photographs, the evidence we'd collected over the past weeks. The light from the lamp fell on the papers, highlighting the numbers, the dates, the words they'd thrown at each other, thinking no one would hear. I looked at it all and felt a strange calm grow inside me. Not relief, no, something heavier, more mature. Determination. We were close. Very close. But I wanted more than just proof. I wanted them to destroy themselves. "We need to shake them up," I said, tapping my finger on the printout with the offshore account number. "Make them lose control. If they panic, they'll start making mistakes." Donna nodded, her eyes glittering with a cold light. "What are you suggesting?" "Forge a letter from the bank," I replied. "We'll say the account was discovered, that someone filed a check request. They won't know who it's from, us, the authorities, some random auditor. But they'll make a fuss. And we'll be watching." She thought for a second. Then the corner of her lips twitched into a faint smile. "It could work," she said. "Joshua always gets lost when things don't go according to plan. And Margaret, she's overconfident. She'll try to fix it on her own." We spent the evening writing the letter. Donna found an old letterhead from the bank they used for business, and we forged the logo, the seal, the text. "Dear customer," the letter began, "we have received notification of suspicious activity on your account, hashtag 5913-1451. Please report to the nearest branch to confirm transactions within 48 hours, or the account will be frozen pending the outcome of the investigation." I added some official jargon to make it sound plausible, and Donna printed 2 copies, one for Joshua and one for Margaret. We sent them via courier with a fictitious return address. The next day, I watched the house from the car parked across the street. Margaret came home around noon, carrying packages from a store, still playing the part of the perfect wife. The courier pulled up an hour later. I watched her open the door, take the envelope, frown. She disappeared inside, but a minute later she was out on the porch with the phone in her hand, dialing a number. Her face was tense, her lips moving quickly, furiously. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew who she was calling. Joshua. Donna, meanwhile, was watching her husband. She called me shortly after the courier delivered the letter to their home. "He's in a panic," she said, her voice shaking with contained excitement. He's pacing around the living room, yelling something about idiots at the bank. Just left, probably to go to her place. And sure enough, half an hour later, Joshua's truck pulled up in front of our house. He jumped out, slammed the door, and ran up to the porch. I turned on the camera hidden in the bushes by the front door. They didn't know I was here. They didn't know their every move was being recorded. Inside the house, chaos ensued. I could hear scraps through the microphone, Margaret yelling, "You said you had it under control." Joshua snapped back, "This is some kind of mistake. I'll figure it out." They were arguing, blaming each other, and I could feel a grim satisfaction growing inside me. They were falling apart right before my eyes. "We have to transfer the money," Margaret said, her voice lower, sharper. "If they find us." "Transfer it where?" Joshua shouted. "We don't have another account." "Then think of something." She snapped at him. "I'm not going to lose everything because of your stupidity." I smiled as I sat in the car. They were biting each other like hunted animals. But then Joshua said something that made my heart sink. "There's another option," he muttered. "That old account in the Caymans. We can move some of it there. But we'd have to move fast." "The old account? Another one?" I grabbed my phone and texted Donna. "They mentioned the Cayman account. Did you know about it?" She replied almost immediately, "No. But I'll look it up." We weren't expecting a second account. That changed everything and made our game even more dangerous. They left the house 20 minutes later. Joshua looked disheveled. Margaret looked angry but collected. They got into his car and drove off. I followed them to the office of some small-time lawyer on the outskirts of town. Something told me they were trying to cover their tracks, and I knew we had to move faster than they did. I watched as Joshua's pickup disappeared around the corner, taking them to some lawyer who probably had to get them out of this hole. My hands were still clutching the steering wheel, fingers white with tension. They were panicked. I could see it in their movements, hear it in their voices through the microphone. But the mention of the Caymans account kept me on my toes. Another stash. Another lie. How many were there? How many times had they laughed at me while I blindly trusted? Anger boiled, but I forced myself to breathe more evenly. Now was not the time to lose my head. Now was the time to play. I texted Donna, "Keep an eye on Joshua. I'll take care of Margaret." She responded with a quick, "Okay." We were already working as a cohesive team, but this move was mine. I needed to see her eyes, hear her voice, not through a camera, not through a recording, but face to face. I wanted to see how she would lie, knowing I held her fate in my hands. And maybe get something else out, a piece of truth she'd let slip without me noticing. I drove home, mulling over a plan. When Margaret returned a couple hours later, I was ready. She walked in, tossing her bag on the couch, her face still tense, but she quickly put on her usual mask, a slight smile, the same one that had once made me feel special. "You're early," she said, glancing at me. "How was fishing?" "Didn't go," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Tom was sick. Decided to stay home." Her smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "That's a shame." "Well, at least you'll get some rest here." I nodded, watching her. She went into the kitchen and poured herself some water, but I could see her hand shaking slightly. She was on edge. It was time to strike. "Listen, Margaret," I began, pretending to hesitate. "The bank called today. Something about suspicious transfers. Do you know what it was about?" Her glass froze halfway to her lips. She turned to me slowly, and I saw a flicker of concern in her eyes before she pulled back on the smile. "From the bank?" she interjected a little too carelessly. "There must be a mistake. I'm in the clear. Maybe it's your bills?" "I don't think so," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "They mentioned some offshore place. The Caymans, I think." "Weird, huh?" Her face went pale. It was a moment, a split second, when the mask slid away and I saw the real Margaret. Scared. Trapped. But she pulled herself together quickly, laughing, though it was a strained laugh. "Caymans? Charles, are you serious? That sounds like a bad movie. We don't have any offshore." "Maybe not," I shrugged, pretending to be thoughtful. "But they said they were checking. If they find anything, they can freeze everything. Even the house." It was a random shot, but it hit the target. Her eyes widened and she set the glass on the table, nearly spilling the water. "Freeze it?" she repeated, and I could hear the panic in her voice. "They can't, it's a mistake. I'll call them tomorrow, sort it out." "Are you sure?" I asked, leaning a little closer. "Because if it's not a mistake, we'd better know in advance. It's easier together, isn't it?" She looked at me, and I could see the gears turning in her head. She was trying to figure out how much I knew, trying to decide whether to lie further or drop a crumb of truth to shut me up. "Of course," she said finally, her voice softer. "If it's anything serious, I'll tell you. But it's nothing, Charles. Don't worry about it." I nodded, pretending to be reassured, but inside I was cheering. She'd taken the bait. She was nervous, and I knew she'd run to Joshua as soon as I turned my back. When she left for the bedroom, I checked my phone. Donna texted. "Joshua just called someone. Said they need to expedite the transfer." They'd bitten the hook deeper than I'd hoped. I waited until Margaret was asleep. She drank some wine to calm herself down and soon passed out. Then I snuck to her bag and found her cell phone. The password was the same. Our wedding, what a bitter joke. In correspondence with Joshua was a new message sent an hour ago. He suspects something. Gotta move fast. Check the Cayman account. I took a picture of the screen and sent it to Donna. She replied, "I hired a guy who can trace it. We'll know where the money is soon." We were one step ahead, but I sensed they weren't standing still either. Margaret had mentioned expedite the transfer, meaning they were going to make a run for it, and I wasn't about to let them go. I didn't sleep that night. Lying in the dark, listening to Margaret's steady breathing while her phone lay in my hand, hot for my fingers. Every message she sent, every move she made was a map to me, now a map of their betrayal, their greed, their stupidity. She thought I was blind. She thought I'd buy her smiles and lies about a mistake at the bank. But I saw right through her. And now, as she whispered with Joshua about transfer and acceleration, I knew time was running out. They were going to run, and I was going to stop them. In the morning, I texted Donna, "Keep an eye on Joshua. He's going to meet with a lawyer. This is our chance." She replied instantly, "I'm ready." Where and when? We knew Joshua wasn't going to sit still after yesterday. Panic was driving him forward, and I was sure he'd run to the same lawyer they'd visited the day before. Donna and I met at her car, an old sedan as inconspicuous as a shadow. She looked focused, but there were dark circles under her eyes. We were both on edge, but there was nowhere to retreat. We parked near that lawyer's office, a shabby building with a faded legal services sign. An hour later, Joshua's pickup truck pulled up in front of the entrance. He jumped out, looking around like a hunted animal, and sprinted up the steps. Margaret wasn't with him. Apparently, she decided to stay in the shadows. I took out my camera and zoomed in. "He's nervous," Donna whispered, looking through the binoculars. "Look at his hands shaking." I nodded, videotaping him. The office door opened, and a man came out balding, in a rumpled suit, with a folder under his arm. Joshua spoke to him, waving his arms, his voice coming through the open car window. "Need it today," he shouted. "If they find—" The lawyer answered something, too quietly to make out, but Joshua clearly didn't like it. He grabbed the folder, flipped through it, then tossed it back on the desk by the entrance. "He's losing control," Donna said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. We waited. 15 minutes later, Joshua came out, clutching his cell phone in his hands. He dialed the number. I saw him press the receiver to his ear, his lips moving quickly, furiously. I turned on the recorder, even though I knew the sound would be weak. But then he did something I hadn't expected him to do. He stepped closer to the car, unable to see us behind the tinted windows. "Margaret, listen," he bellowed, his voice as clear as a punch. "The lawyer says the Cayman account can be traced. We have to get everything now. Tickets for tomorrow, you understand? We're leaving tomorrow night." I froze. Donna squeezed my shoulder, her nails digging into my skin. Tomorrow night. They'd planned to run away with my money, with her business, with what they'd stolen from both of us. But now we had this, his voice, his plan, recorded on a tape recorder. It wasn't just a trump card. It was a victory. Now what? Donna whispered as Joshua got into the truck and drove away. Now we finished them off, I replied, feeling a cold, clear confidence growing inside me. We have proof. Their words, their account, their tickets. We're going to a lawyer. Today. We got out of a car and headed toward the office. The lawyer was still inside. I could see his silhouette through the window. I knocked and he opened the door, looking at us suspiciously. "What can I do for you?" He mumbled. "We know about the Cayman account," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "And the transfers. We have the records. Joshua was just here. If you don't want to get in trouble with the law, tell me what he's planning." His face paled. He tried to mumble something, but Donna stepped forward, her voice like steel. "We have video, audio, documents. If you're involved in this, you're going down with him. Or you can help us and stay clean." He swallowed, stepped back, inviting us in. Half an hour later, we had everything. Copies of the papers Joshua had left behind, proof of transfers, even a draft of their escape plan. The lawyer had sold them to save his own skin. And I didn't blame him. They dug their own hole. As we walked out, I looked at Donna. Her face was impenetrable, but triumph burned in her eyes. "They were going to leave tomorrow night," she said. "But now we're going to stop them." "Not just stop them," I replied. "We will destroy them. Tomorrow will be their last day of freedom." I drove home feeling like a fire was burning inside me, not the kind that burns everything in its path, but the kind that cleanses. We had everything: notes, documents, Joshua's word about the escape, confirmation of the transfers to the Caymans. The lawyer cracked like a rotten nut and gave us the keys to their plan. Tomorrow night they were going to disappear, with our money, our lives, leaving us in the dust. But I wasn't going to let them go. Not like this. I wanted Margaret to look me in the eye when her world came crashing down. I wanted her to realize she'd lost. Donna left to see her lawyer to prepare the court papers and freeze the account. She was like a machine, cold, precise, unstoppable. But I chose a different path. I needed to see her, Margaret, my wife, who laughed in my face while she planned to destroy me. I wasn't going to make a scene at the airport or drag her to the police, not yet. I wanted her to tell me herself first, so she couldn't get away with it. When I got home, she was in the kitchen pouring herself some wine. Her hair was gathered into a careless bun, and she was wearing my old t-shirt, the same one she'd slept in during the early years of our marriage. The picture was almost cozy, almost real, but I knew the truth. She heard my footsteps and turned around, smiling that easy, carefree smile I had once loved. "You're late," she said, raising her glass. "Would you like some wine?" "No," I answered, setting my bag on the table. My voice was steady, but inside I was shaking with tension. "We need to talk." Her smile trembled, but she shrugged. "About what?" "You look tired, Charles. How about tomorrow?" "No, now," I said, stepping closer. "I know everything, Margaret." She froze, her hand with the glass hanging in the air. I could see her brain frantically searching for a way out, but I didn't give her the chance. "About you and Joshua. About the account in the Caymans. Your tickets for tomorrow. I know you were going to leave. Take everything I have and run away with it." Her face went pale, the glass nearly slipping from her fingers. She set it down on the table slowly, as if stalling for time. "Charles, what do you mean?" she began, her voice weak, trembling. "This is nonsense." "Don't lie." I cut her off, pulling out my phone and turning it on. Joshua's voice filled the kitchen. "Tickets for tomorrow, okay? We're leaving tomorrow night." Her eyes widened and she stepped back, resting against the countertop. It's not what you think," she squeezed out. "I can explain." "Explain?" I stepped toward her, my voice louder, sharper. "Explain how you lied to my face? How you planned to leave me with nothing while I was losing my job, while I was trying to save us? You laughed at me, Margaret. With him. With Joshua. My best friend." She opened her mouth, but the word stuck. I watched her mask crumble. That cheerful, easygoing Margaret was disappearing, leaving behind a woman cornered. She tried to pull herself together, stepped toward me, holding out her hand. "Charles, listen," she said, her voice softer, almost pleading. "I made a mistake. I messed up. We can fix this. You And me. Start over. I recoiled as if struck. Her words were empty, desperate, and all I felt was disgust. Fix it? I repeated, almost laughing. You ruined everything. 10 years. My home. My life. And now that I've caught you, you're asking me to start over? Her eyes filled with tears, but I knew it wasn't remorse. It was fear. She realized she'd lost. I pulled out a folder of papers, the copies the lawyer had given me, and threw them on the table. Here are your transfers. Your plans. I have video, audio, everything. The lawyer will have this tomorrow morning. And the police. You and Joshua, you're done. She stared at the papers, her breathing becoming intermittent. Then she collapsed into a chair, covering her face with her hands. You don't understand, she whispered. I didn't mean to. It was he who talked me into it. That's enough. I cut her off. I don't want to hear any more of your lies. I turned and walked out into the living room, leaving her there. An hour later, she called Joshua. I could hear her hysterical voice through the walled dash he knows. It's all gone. I didn't interfere. Let her scream. Let her drown. I packed a bag and left for Donna's. The next day, she and I filed all the evidence in court. The account was frozen. The police started investigating. Joshua tried to escape alone, but they caught him at the airport. Margaret stayed home, calling me dozens of times, leaving me pleading and threatening messages. You've ruined my life. She screamed in the last one. I replied only once. No, Margaret. You ruined it yourself. And hung up. A week later, Donna and I were sitting on the beach. The wind was driving the waves. The sun was setting, coloring the sky purple. She held a glass of wine. I held a beer. We were silent, but the silence was light, free. What now? She asked finally, looking at the horizon. I grinned, feeling the tension of the last few months let go. Now a new life. No lies. No betrayal. Just life. We had a drink. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was breathing. It was over. And it was just beginning.